Okay, this is Jessica Lamb with We the People Media. Truth Unfiltered. The last couple of weeks, a flood of news has been coming down the pipe, and something happened to me yesterday. I have a habit of breaking things down, really digging into them, really researching. So I watch a lot of videos when I do my research. I also watch a lot of things that people send to me. And I was watching a video about 9/11, and this map came up on the screen. I'm going to show you this map. Okay. Now, most of you may have not heard about the North American Union. This is a plan that they've been talking about for a long time. They were really talking about it on the news and really talking about it. Had several documentaries on this between 2008 and 2010. I saw this map, this very one, in a video I was watching. And something clicked in my head. I saw a picture of another map. And this was a map most of you who follow my videos and my posts will know that a couple weeks ago I was talking about how the government's planning on taking property from private property owners who live in or around on each side of the Chisholm Trail. Now, the Chisholm Trail runs up to the northern part of the United States. It goes up higher than this map here. Right here is the map. It runs all the way down into San Antonio. And I took these maps and I set them side by side with this one. And I said, man, that sure does look exactly like the path of the Chisholm Trail. Almost correlates perfectly. Then I thought about what came up also this week is the military wants to do an 8-week drill in which they come into the southern parts of the United States where they consider Texas hostile, Utah hostile, and the southern part of California hostile. And most part of Texas in these areas that they listed are in and around I-35, which also the Chisholm Trail is in and around I-35. And also the plan that they have to put in this super corridor is around I-35. So this kind of all fell in my lap. And I decided to do a video about it about 20 hours ago. And at about 1 a.m., this story came across the pipe from the Daily Mail. This comes out of the UK. That they're planning on building a 12,400-mile superhighway from Britain to America. Plans proposed very ambitious road across Russia. Now you can see the map there. You see the red line that runs from the UK all the way to Alaska. So you have this map, right? And then you have this map that runs from Mexico to Canada. Here's the problem. There are private property owners that live along these trails, along the Chisholm Trail. There are ranchers and cattlemen who have lived there for hundreds of years. Their families have lived there. Now, the government's excuse is, oh, well, you know, we're going to build a national park. Really? I don't buy that. And the reason I don't buy that is because this plan is coming out about the superhighway, which I couldn't have known this because this came out at 1 a.m. I made my other video 19 to 20 hours ago. So it kind of gives me chills. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time. And we're going to look over what this North American Union is. And I'm going to show you, since everyone loves their vetted sources, Fox News reports, CNN reports, and we're going to come up to the present time. And you're going to see just how much you're being lied to. My husband told me, Jessica, I know you're trying hard to wake people up. I even called my friend Stacy on the phone and I said, I can't believe this. I can't believe this is happening to us. And I can't believe that people are still blinded to what's going on. And he told me, just do your videos for the people who are awake so you can help them. Be prepared. So I said, okay. And my husband said, this is my last ditch effort. He said, I'm going to help you in this. I'm going to help you make this video. Because it was both of our minds kind of pieced this together and worked really hard reading and studying and constantly trying to keep up to date with everything. So he's going to help me make this little special report. Probably a little bit longer. It might be a little what you would call a documentary. But I want people to understand this. I'm not here to sugarcoat. I'm not here to scare you. I don't want you to be scared. I want you to be prepared. Okay? I know there's a lot of you out there that's going to watch this video and completely not understand this first part of it. But once you get through this and you see what is happening to your country, I'm hoping that you will pick up a camera, or you will get on Facebook, or you will share as much information as you can share and stand up for your people, the American people, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, not the GOP, not Obama, not the establishment. Stand up for you and your family and your countrymen and women. Because we're all going to lose if we don't. We're going to lose our sovereignty as a country. And here lately, we've lost a lot more than that. I would ask that people not be afraid to try to find the courage to stand up for what is right. We all know the difference between right and wrong.
The Bush administration's open borders policy and its decision to ignore the enforcement of this country's immigration laws is part of a broader agenda. President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it, and he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States. Bill Tucker reports.
The Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America sounds benign, hardly like a policy that critics call NAFTA on steroids. It's a deal that few have even heard of.
It's being done again by very few people at the very top on behalf of the investment class, but the working class of people. Political officials across our country, from communities, from cities and so forth, they don't know anything about this.
Yet it was agreed to by Mexico's President Fox, Canada's Prime Minister Martin, and President Bush in 2005. Administration officials counter their critics by saying everything about SPP is on the White House website. And they say the partnership is not a treaty, but more of an outline of priorities between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Still, some wonder why there haven't been public discussions about the goals being pursued.
This SPP includes, for instance, a committee that is sitting down to harmonize our meat inspection and food safety. So how far away from a trade agreement can your dining room table and what you feed your kids be?
Other parts of the agreement mention border security as an issue, which include all of North America. In fact, the name of the agreement is not Security and Prosperity of the United States, but of North America.
When we elect officials, we expect them to act on our behalf. When we get involved in cooperative frameworks with other countries for joint regulation of fisheries or rail transportation or the skies, we're basically sharing our sovereignty with that government and outsourcing some of what we give our elected officials.
As disturbing as some find SPP, there is legislation in the House introduced by Florida's Catherine Harris that closely resembles the goals of the partnership. Included in that bill is a section which calls for the securing of Mexico's southern border by the United States and Canada. Lou, that's not the border with the United States, that's the border they share with Belize and Guatemala.
The idea that the White House would respond that this is on their website, this involves intricate workings amongst the Commerce Department of this country and Canada and Mexico's, of course. A regional prosperity and security program. This is absolute ignorance. And the fact that we reported this, we should point out, when it was signed. But as we watch this thing progress, these working groups are continuing, they're intensifying. What in the world are these people thinking about?
Well, they say, look, these are a declaration and an outline of our priorities. And when I called them today, Lou, they said I was the first phone call they had received literally since the deal was first signed. So people are not paying attention, and they're letting them, in fact, get away with this.
You know, I was asked the other day about whether or not I really thought the American people had the stomach to stand up and stop this nonsense, this direction from a group of elites in absolute contravention of our law, of our Constitution, every national value. And I hope, I pray that I'm right when I said yes, that this is beyond belief. Bill Tucker, thank you very much. It brings us to the subject of our poll tonight. Do you think maybe somebody should take a vote if we're going to merge the United States with Canada and Mexico? Maybe, you know, people like you and me vote. Yes or no? Please cast your vote at LouDobbs.com. We'll have the results here later in the broadcast. Coming up, a measure to raise wages for the
independence as goods that used to be made here are displaced by foreign imports. In fact, America is in uncharted waters today. We have an accumulating trade deficit now of nearly $1 trillion a year. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Super NAFTA and what the Bush administration is planning to lock NAFTA in even tighter in this country and across the continent. There's something called the Agreement on Security and Prosperity that is being negotiated by the Bush administration very quietly. No hearings are being held in this Congress. Most Americans have never even heard of the term, but it really is the successor to NAFTA. In addition to what it anticipates in terms of a new transportation corridor that will come up through Mexico and the American highway into the United States, it also includes the incentives to major corporations such as Ford Corporation of our country that is laying off people in our country, now an additional 30,000 jobs to be lost here in the United States, and Ford is planning to employ over 150,000 more workers in Mexico, announcing that it will be investing over $9.2 billion in Mexico. It is hard to explain to the American people how big that investment really is, but truly it will employ 15% or 1 of 7 of all unemployed people in Mexico. So many of them having been uprooted from their farmsteads because NAFTA included no transition provisions to allow people to have a life and to survive inside of Mexico's rural areas, and over 2 million families have been uprooted from Mexico's farm communities and are doing what? They're moving north to eat. At the heart of our illegal immigration problem is NAFTA's disruption of the Mexican countryside. But in any case, this Security and Prosperity Agreement, as it is being called, has no democratic underpinning to it. It's being negotiated by the very same elites that negotiated NAFTA. And let's look at some of the signs of what is happening. It is suddenly clearer why a company from Spain called Sintra wants to be the gatekeeper on this new highway structure to manage the flow of goods from Mexico, including the hundreds of thousands of vehicles that Ford Motor intends to manufacture in Mexico after making its $9.2 billion investment there. Sintra is a subsidiary of Ferrovial, the Spanish transportation company founded by multi-billionaire Rafael de Pino, who is one of the richest people in the world. Sintra already operates the Chicago Skyway, one of the nodes along the way here, under a 99-year concession, and is planning development of the Trans-Texas Corridor, which is another part of this plan. Sintra is a 50-50 partner with Macquarie Infrastructure Group, an Australian investment bank, in another place in America called Indiana, where the Indiana Turnpike, can you believe this, has been leased to a foreign interest. And we're told that Ohio, the state that I represent, might be the next state to unwisely rent one of its major assets to a foreign nation. Human Events magazine recently had this description. It said the North American Super Corridor Coalition is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to developing this international integrated multimodal transportation system along the international mid-continent trade and transportation corridor. Where does that sentence say anything about the United States? Still, this group has received $2.5 million in earmarks from the U.S. Department of Transportation to plan this NAFTA superhighway as a 10-lane limited access road plus passenger and freight rail lines running alongside pipelines originally laid for oil and natural gas. One glance at the map of the NAFTA superhighway on the front page of NASCO's website will make clear that the design is to connect Mexico, Canada, and the United States into one transportation system. But guess what's going to happen? If you look at what's going on in Mexico, guess where Mexico is getting most of the parts to put into their production? Not from the United States. They're getting them from China. In fact, a lot of production in Mexico has been moved to China. So imagine this, huge container ships continuing to come in from China and Asia, hitting up against ports like Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico, where the workforce earns almost nothing, and the major ports in our country of Los Angeles, of Oakland, all along the West Coast. I just wish we were shipping goods out. But right now our longshoremen and our dock workers are loading and unloading containers in the United States. But you can go around the United States. You can bring in that massive set of shipments from Asia through Mexico and up into the United States. And imagine if this corridor is then leased to foreign interests, who then charge tolls and become familiar with the transportation systems of the United States. This is the heart of America. This can displace every other major transportation system that we have if this is locked in piece by piece, and we have plenty of evidence that that is exactly what is going on already as an underpinning to this agreement that's being called Security and Prosperity. My question is, how much democracy will that agreement actually have in it? Will it be prosperity for all, or just for people who are rich enough to own global companies like Sintra that will invest anywhere, don't know the people in our communities, frankly don't care, and are willing to move production anywhere? The people of the United States had better wake up. We better ask ourselves, why are Americans having to work so hard for less? Why is it more expensive for them to send their children to college and then those kids graduate with huge debts? Why isn't your pension plan secure? Why are you having to pay so much more for health care? Why is not your retirement benefit there forever? Because these kinds of interests don't want you to have it, because they are so filthy rich off the investments they are making globally. They don't care about you. They don't care about this country. They don't care about where you come from. And my friends, they don't care about democracy.
Vice President Joe Biden calls the newest graduates of the Air Force Academy strategic thinkers as well as warriors, and the future of the New World Order.
It allows us to refocus our intelligence and military assets and resources to other parts of the world where they are needed, where we face new challenges. This is the world you are graduating into. This is what I want to talk about today with you for a few minutes. I believe we, and particularly you, your class, has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century in a way consistent with American interest and the common interest.
During an event honoring the 223rd anniversary of Poland's constitution last night, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said we are seeing a new 21st century world order being built, and although there are conflicts and complications, there's still hope.
I think what's more hopeful, and maybe than any other time in the history of the world, is that we have more opportunities, and more possibilities, and more resources.
We meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. I congratulate you on taking your place on the long gray line. But the world is changing with accelerating speed. This presents opportunity, but also new dangers. It will be your generation's task to respond to this new world.
Over the last 2 years, journalists and activists have been fighting a specific provision in the annual National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, through a lawsuit called Hedges v. Obama. It's called Section 1021B, otherwise known as the Indefinite Detention Clause, which gives the U.S. military the right to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens anywhere in the world, including right here in America.
This not only attacks your First Amendment rights, it attacks your Fifth Amendment rights, your due process clause, because this gives not the U.S. government, but the U.S. military the right to detain you and indefinitely with no due process.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Now, when I was in America, I don't often say this, but I might as well say it here tonight. My driver, who has carried all the prophetic preachers across America before me, told me, he said, every time we get to a bridge, you watch. And we went through 38 states in 2.5 weeks, and every bridge we went near, there were men working underneath it, putting in steel girders. He said, that is for the United Nations tanks that are going to come in and take over America shortly. Is everybody clear what I'm saying tonight? This goes on tape. The whole of America will be inundated with United Nations troops. In fact, they're training now.
Heavy artillery rocked downtown Tampa today as military gunships and helicopters roared by the convention center. Now, this was all part of the annual Special Forces Operations Convention. And while it wasn't a real invasion, our Chris Trankman says it looked about as real as it could get.
This was different. This was a first for me. Usually no one sees what we do.
The display featured Apache helicopters speeding overhead, while bigger Black Hawk choppers carried highly trained operatives as part of a make-believe invasion.
In the distance, they must travel to the target.
The spectacle rivals.
Okay, now I'm going to read to you some of these articles, and then we're going to show you some footage. Putin says Russia will never succumb to a unipolar world order. Saturday, February 7th, 2015. Russian president says his country will never accept a world order which is headed by one single government. Vladimir Putin on Saturday said Moscow will oppose a unipolar world order where an undisputed leader imposes his own will on the world. There's an attempt to disguise the current world order that has taken shape over the past few decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a world order that is headed by one undisputed leader who wants to remain such, Putin told a Congress of Independent Trade Union Federation of Russia in the Black Sea resort city of Sochi. Putin was clearly lashing out at the United States, which is currently at loggerheads with Russia over the armed conflict in East Ukraine. He said that Russia will never be satisfied with a world system in which only things are allowed that meet the interests of an undisputed leader. A leader who assumes that everything is allowed to him, but others only need what he allows them and what meets his own interests. Russia will never be satisfied with this kind of world order, Putin added. Sanctions will fail. Meanwhile, Putin admitted that the current U.S.-led sanctions on Russia have harmed the country, but added that such measures will never achieve their goals, emphasizing that sanctions will ultimately benefit no one, Putin said. They definitely can't be effective against a country such as ours, though they do cause us certain damage and harm, and we should realize this. Putin added that Russia is not at war and does not want war, adding that attempts have been made to curb the development of Russia. Russia has been hit by several rounds of Western sanctions over the crisis in Ukraine. Although the restrictive measures have backfired on the economy of the European countries, the armed conflict in East Ukraine has claimed the lives of more than 5,300 people, according to the estimates made by the United Nations. Western governments keep accusing Russia of supporting an armed military against the Ukrainian government. Moscow denies the charges, saying Kiev must stop the suppression of the ethnic Russian population in the area. This next one came out of the Associated Press on March 20th, 2015. NATO-Russian officials clash over situation in Europe. Brussels, AP. Top officials from NATO and Russia clash sharply in public Friday over who is to blame for the dramatically worsened state of East and West relations. The big difference is that we are a defensive alliance, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told a member of Russia's parliament. You send troops into other countries. The Russian Konstantin Kozev flatly denied Russia is using its regular troops in Ukraine. He said the U.S.-led alliance talks a lot these days about the need to respect international law and a country's borders and sovereignty, but it had bombed a sovereign nation, the former Yugoslavia, in 1999. Stoltenberg and Kozev, who is the chairman of the International Affairs Committee of Russia Federation Council, spoke at a panel discussion organized by the Brussels Forum, an annual event sponsored by German Marshall Fund think tank. The discussion in which U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini also took part, provided repeated and stark evidence of how deep the divide between Russia and the West has become. At one point, Mogherini said the exchanges seemed to her to come from another century, when the discussion turned to the growing threat of cyber attacks. Russians of engaging in Khrushchev asked Stoltenberg point blank if NATO would bomb a country it held responsible for such an assault. Nuland jumped in, asking the Russian lawmaker if he was posing a planning question. Stoltenberg gave a deliberately murky answer. "We will do what's necessary to do to protect all allies," he said. "But I'm not going to tell you exactly how I'm going to do that." That's the main message.
U.S. congressmen have once again called on President Barack Obama to start supplying Ukraine with lethal weapons.
Rising today as Democrats and Republicans, really as Americans, to say enough is enough in Ukraine.
The world is closely watching what we will do to help Ukraine defend itself from outright assault.
And the U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly approved a resolution urging lethal assistance in Ukraine. The administration had so far been resisting calls to send arms to Kiev, citing the peace efforts currently underway. Here's Victoria Nuland welcoming the Minsk agreement at one of the recent hearings in Congress.
If fully implemented, these steps will bring peace to eastern Ukraine for the first time in almost a year. For some in Ukraine, conditions have already begun to improve since February 12th. In parts of the east, the guns have been silenced, and the OSCE has begun to gain access.
However, congressmen view the administration's reluctance to send lethal aid as a dangerous inaction. RT's Alexei Reshevsky reports.
The resolution, it's not legally binding, but it's urging and calling on the President of the United States to provide lethal military support to Ukraine. Now, of course, we know that in the past several months, the U.S. has provided Ukrainian army with non-lethal support, and there's been a lot of speculation and deliberation here in the United States whether the U.S. President, whether the administration would provide lethal help. But clearly, ever since President Poroshenko's speech at the U.S. Congress last September, when he asked for the military help from the U.S., pressure has been mounting. Just last week, the joint letter from the Democratic and Republican parties to the U.S. president also called on the administration to provide lethal help to Ukraine. And now, obviously, this is escalating into this resolution. But of course, we'll have to wait and see what kind of reaction will follow from the U.S. president.
Back in December 2014, Congress already passed a bill authorizing $350 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. It covered so-called defensive weapons like anti-tank weapons, radars, and unmanned surveillance drones. Obama signed that bill. Even before that, though, Washington had been giving Kiev various types of equipment. And just recently in March, it agreed to send Humvees and drones, but has not yet sent lethal weapons. Well, for all the details on the current Congress resolution on Ukraine, you can just head to RT.com. And there you can also find all the very latest about the peace agreement in the country's east.
Concerned about end times and the possibility of a major third world war, that you may even end your own radio broadcast. Is that true?
That's true, George. I am really concerned. And let me share this with you. I'm not trying to, quote, do anything other than give people the warning. And I basically now am pre-recording the last shows. My last show, I think, will be around the 15th of September. Right now, I'm doing no more live shows. I am that concerned. Let me tell you what's going on with
And will you still make yourself available to this program?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, and here's the thing. I actually announced that, too. I said the only show I'm going to do is I said I'll do one more show with Alex, and I said I'll do a show with George. And I said that's all I know so far. Let's get to what's going on in Russia. Russia's given us a 21-day deadline to pull out of the Black Sea. Under the Mediterranean Agreement, there can only be so many NATO ships in that part of the world at any given time. Now, as you know, the United States wants to put radar in Poland and some anti-missile systems, and Russia sees himself as being encircled. In quid pro quo basis, Russia now is basically bringing men and materials into Cuba, and as interesting, this isn't reported in the mainstream press. Nothing I'm talking about is in the press because we're being inundated with what I call the inaneness of the entertained. Nothing makes me crazier than the absolute inane programming that comes out of the network, you know, all the big stations. So what we've got now is we've got a timetable where Vladimir Putin made the statement that he is going to basically match NATO ship for ship. One of the Russian generals, and here's what I learned, George, in all the years of understanding the Russians. If you know a specific personality and they do what they say they're going to do, and they're not known for Bravo Sierra, in other words, BS, and when you hear them saying that they can sink every ship we have in the Black Sea in 20 minutes, that's not an endless boast. The Russians have what are called super sunburn missiles. They also have the Squall torpedo. A torpedo, you're an old Navy man, a torpedo that can go 300 to 400 miles an hour is a threat to any ship.
And meanwhile, Cheney is in Azerbaijan talking about oil and energy while all this is going on, which I find to be very strange.
It's very strange because not only that, but I have Norwegian listeners to my radio show, and they give me real-time reports of the Russian bombers overhead, and then the Norwegian scramble their fighters to intercept them. But what's really troubling is the amount of men and materials going into Venezuela, going into Cuba. Under the guise of these hurricanes, there's a whole lot of submarine movement. One of the things that we've been able to do on my radio program is because there are a lot of people, ex-military, ex-intelligence, that want the American people to understand how vulnerable we are.
Is it true that the Georgian government initially started killing citizens in those two broken-off provinces, and it amounts to maybe it was 1,000 people, maybe more at the time? Is that true? Is that a true statement?
That does appear to be true. And as you know, Vladimir Putin said the United States is behind it. Now, I'm not trying to, quote, take sides, but what I'm trying to share is this. Let me put the big picture, and then we'll back it up. There are a group of individuals that believe that in order to bring about the New World Order, there has to be a World War III. And World War III isn't going to happen just by accident. It's being engineered to happen. They believe that out of this World War III comes a man of peace. That's their savior, and he's known as in the Bible as the Antichrist, or the man of perdition. And what's fascinating, George, is that Ezekiel 38 starts as Gog-Magog war, and what's even becoming more apparent is that the rhetoric is escalating. I tell everybody, and I think it's a good key indicator, watch the rhetoric, and as the rhetoric rises, so the actions become more extreme.
And it is rising.
And it's rising. And the thing is that the World War III scenario, we get live reports. Again, a good example, a number of months ago, Hawk was on my radio program. Again, he's my guest host, taking Thursdays for me. And someone had informed him, some of his contacts, that there was a Russian supersonic bomber that one of our P-3 or one of our sub-hunting aircraft had intercepted off, I think, the Grand Banks of North Carolina. The P-3 was basically giving a warning and asking for assistance, and some junior-level military person wasn't taking them serious. Hawk began to broadcast, hey, you guys better get something up there. We've got a supersonic coming in below radar that's coming hot and heavy, and no one's paying attention to their warning calls. Well, within 5 minutes, a massive amount of jets were scrambled. But you see, it's not just a return to the Cold War. I want to make this clear. I believe this is the beginning of World War III. And if people understand that all it takes is somebody responding the wrong way with a sub encounter, and we are intercepting subs. Even right now, I just got an email going on that the sub hunts are on right now off the east and west coast, and that all the military channels. Now, we don't know what they're saying. We just know that, you know, the specific information is out there that this is escalating. So Putin is saying to the United States, if you're going to be in my backyard, I'm going to be in your backyard.
But is anybody dumb enough to launch nukes?
Well, let me tell you this. Do you know that the Russians just stated again, and Medvedev gave a 5-point plan recently, that Russia reserves the right and will use preemptive nuclear weapons?
Yeah, especially in Poland.
Yep. And the thing is that do I think anybody's dumb enough? No, but I think if it gets out of hand, it will escalate to that. And this is what's incredible, because here's the deal. Russia has let it be known that if either Israel or the United States attacks Iran, that it's all over. Even Bashar al-Assad of Syria, the different Iranian spokesmen, everybody is saying if this takes place, it's World War III.
What happened overnight? Again, it's not overnight. These things are festering, but it appears to us like the mortgage collapse, that all of a sudden it just happened. I mean, how did the Russians become so anti everything that's going on now? What happened? What provoked them?
Well, pretty much the idea after the breakup of, and I believe that was staged, but they wanted to be treated. This is their statement now. Okay, they wanted to be treated as an equal. We kept them out of the G8. We kept them out of so many different things, and NATO's expansion eastward from the west, moving east into the former Soviet breakaway territories, i.e. the Ukraine, Georgia was a big issue, obviously Poland. The thing is that is when they drew the line in the sand. But the Georgian incident seems to have been generated to provoke a military response.
Well, another announcement today by President-elect Obama giving new life to the North American Union, a plan by business and political elites to tear down the trade barriers among the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and to create a NAFTA superhighway, all of which to be done without the approval of Congress or the American people. President-elect Obama named a diehard free trader and NAFTA supporter to be his U.S. trade representative. Bill Tucker has our report.
Ron Kirk is President-elect Obama's pick to be his front man on trade. Kirk made his name in politics serving as mayor of Dallas, where he was known as a staunch supporter of free trade agreements, NAFTA in particular. He was a big proponent of a trade corridor from Mexico up through Texas, a road he once referred to as a NAFTA freeway. His nomination was welcomed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers. Advocates for a change in trade policy are not so happy.
There's clearly been a gap between President-elect Obama's pledges to the American public to truly transform our failed trade policy and some of the very important economic appointments he's made who represent people who helped implement or at least support the failed status quo.
Congressman Phil Hare, a Democrat from Obama's home state of Illinois, issued a statement expressing his disappointment, saying, quote, "I have concerns about Mayor Kirk's vocal support for NAFTA and unfair trade with China. Mayor Kirk previously has said he wants to make Dallas the capital city of NAFTA. But for every Dallas, there are dozens of Galesburgs, a place President-elect Obama knows well. Maytag, the appliance maker, was once the largest employer in Galesburg, Illinois, until it moved 1,600 jobs to Mexico. Critics say the appointment falls in line with others by Obama, and they don't like what they see.
If you look at President Obama's economic team, they have all been enthusiastic supporters of outsourcing-focused trade policy agreements that have exported not only good jobs from American shores, but high-value, technology-intensive production.
Our current trading policies have created a near $1 trillion deficit and have been blamed for the loss of millions of American jobs that have moved to low-wage countries.
Now, the apparent contradiction in Obama's words and actions has activists on another front worried. Last February, Obama pledged that he would resume the Security and Prosperity Partnership talks between Mexico and Canada that President Bush initiated. He also said the talks will be transparent. Those opposed to the North American Union say that now whether he will or will not deliver on that promise becomes something they doubt. Lou.
Well, this is early on. The president-elect is starting to look like, it's starting to look when it comes to trade. As Lori Wallach, the public citizen, pointed out, Global Trade Watch, I mean, the old boss is starting to look a lot like the new boss when it comes to the issues of offshoring, free trade. This is troubling indeed.
It is, and all those people in the piece tonight, Lou, are people who are inclined to support him, who are people who want to be on his side, and they're reluctant in their sort of reservations about what he's doing with Kirk.
Well, it is an extraordinary appointment, but I'm sure that we'll find out some others were extraordinary too, just as we have with previous presidencies. Thank you very much, Bill Tucker.
Okay, this comes out of Yahoo. Came out March 23rd, 2015, 8:56 p.m. Lawmakers urge Britain to rearm in response to Russia. Members of the Royal Marines march past St. Paul's Cathedral in central London. London AFP. Britain must urgently rebuild defense capabilities abandoned after the Cold War to face growing global threats, including from Russia, a committee of lawmakers warned on Tuesday. The Common Defense Committee, which examines the spending and policy of the Defense Ministry, said nuclear capacity tanks, warships, and aircraft were needed to deter Russian President Vladimir Putin. The world is more dangerous and unstable than at any time since the end of the Cold War, the report said, referring to Russia's annexation of Crimea and seizure of territory by Islamic State and Boko Haram militants. Capacities eroded since the Cold War. The report comes as a truce between pro-Russian rebels and Ukrainian forces was tested in East Ukraine in a conflict that has damaged relations between Russia and the West and has claimed 6,000 lives since April. The committee said it would be necessary for Britain to stick to its NATO commitment to spend 2% of the GDP on defense, but that this would not be sufficient. It is vital to rethink the fundamental assumptions of our defense planning if we are to help arrest the descent into chaos which threatens to spread from the western Mediterranean to the Black Sea, the report said. It pointed out weaknesses in NATO's defense, saying that Russia could deploy 150,000 troops in 72 hours, while it would take NATO 6 months to do so. NATO's newly announced Very High Readiness Joint Task Force could deploy 5,000 troops in 48 hours, but would not be ready until 2016, the report said. The report said it was difficult to mobilize critical mass in the air, as Britain's Royal Air Force has been cut to 7 squadrons from 33, while the Royal Navy's frigates, and destroyers fleet had more than half since 1990. However, Defense Secretary Michael Fallon dismissed the report, saying the Conservative-led government of David Cameron had plugged a black hole in the defense budget. The UK has the second largest defense budget in NATO and the largest in the EU, Fallon said. We are the U.S. largest partner in the coalition air effort against ISIL, Islamic State, bearing more of the load in terms of strikes in Iraq than we played in either of the Gulf Wars. Here's another one. Newsmax. Denmark may face nuke attack if it joins missile shield Russia. Saturday, March 21st, 2015, 1 p.m. Russia's ambassador to Denmark said Saturday that the NATO's country navy could be targeted by nuclear missiles if it joins the Western Alliance anti-missile shield. The threat made by Ambassador Michael Vanen in an opinion piece he wrote for the Danish daily Jyllands-Posten sparked an angry reaction and came amid an increasingly Cold War-style standoff between Moscow and the West. I do not think that the Danes fully understand the consequences of what happens if Denmark joins the U.S.-led missile defense, Ambassador Michael Vanen wrote in the Daily. If this happens, Danish warships become targets for Russian nuclear missiles. Russia has long opposed NATO's missile shield, launched in 2010, and due to be fully operational by 2025, in which member countries contribute radar and weaponry to protect Europe against missile attacks. Denmark has pledged to supply one or more frigates equipped with advanced radar to track incoming missiles. The chairwoman of the Danish Parliament's Foreign Affairs, Mette Gerskov, told AFP the comments were very threatening and not necessary, as the missile shield was simply an intruder alarm and no danger to Russia. This is a way of escalating the verbal tone between Russia and NATO, she said, adding that the comments were also aimed at Russian public opinion, but it doesn't change the fact that we're not afraid. Denmark's Foreign Minister, Martin Lidegaard, said the remarks were...
This story from Europe, Russia threatening nuclear attacks on the country of Denmark. Moscow's ambassador in Copenhagen saying that Danish ships will be the target if Denmark joins NATO's missile defense program. Greg Palcott's watching this story out of London. Greg, what's this all about?
Bill, well, it's another threat, at the very least, from Russia in what is increasingly called by the experts that we talk to here a new Cold War between Russia and the West. It came from the Russian ambassador to Denmark. He wrote over the weekend that Danish ships, which regularly ply the Baltic Sea off the Russian coast, could become targets of Russian atomic missiles if they put radar dishes on them for a new NATO missile defense system as planned. Now, Copenhagen is only 300 miles from the closest bit of Russia, so it is in the neighborhood. That threat from Russia, just the latest provocation against Europe recently. It stepped up military exercises nearby. Its planes regularly enter European national airspace. Its ships nose around the European coastline and harbors. Now, as for that NATO missile defense system, Russian President Vladimir Putin has long been upset about it. He's also threatened Poland and Romania, which are planning to base missiles on their own territories. For its part, NATO says the system is not aimed at any one country. The U.S. ambassador to Denmark also weighing in this weekend, Bill. He said that the words from Russia don't inspire confidence or contribute to peace and stability in the region.
We were just watching some video of the ongoing crisis in eastern Ukraine. All this stems from the situation there. What is the latest, Greg?
Yeah, exactly right, Bill. Clearly, the incursions by Russia, as many people have stated, into eastern Ukraine is creating a lot of nervousness in Europe. There is supposed to be a ceasefire there, but clearly it's not being honored. It's reported overnight that Russian-backed militants fired on Ukrainian positions 17 times, injuring 7 people. NATO's top commander in Europe says that there is a threat, and he's also upset about these words as well coming from Russia. Back to you.
Thank you, Greg. Greg Palcott on that story out of London with us today.
Tough talk from Russia as it threatens to use nuclear weapons against Denmark. Moscow has warned that if Denmark joins NATO's missile defense shield, the Danish Navy will be a fair target for a nuclear attack. In comments to the Danish Jyllands-Posten newspaper, Russia's ambassador to Denmark, Mikhail Vanin, said, "I don't think that Danes fully understand the consequences if Denmark joins the American-led missile defense shield. Denmark would be part of the threat against Russia. It would be less peaceful and relations with Russia will suffer. It is, of course, your own decision. I just want to remind you that your finances and security will suffer." Denmark's foreign minister immediately responded to those comments, saying, "If that is what he has said, then it is unacceptable. Russia knows full well that NATO's missile defense shield is defensive and not targeted at Russia." Denmark announced it was joining NATO's defense shield, but 8 months ago. The comments from the Russian ambassador, though, come just after Denmark released information about how often it had to scramble its F-16 fighters to intercept encroaching Russian fighter jets. 58 times in 2014, double what it was in 2012. But it's been a trend right across Europe. NATO jets had to scramble over 400 times last year, a 50% increase, to intercept approaching Russian military aircraft, which prompted NATO's Secretary General to make these comments.
The challenge is partly the numbers, but it's also the way they are conducting the flights. They are not firing their air or flight plans. They are not turning on the transponders. and they are not communicating with civilian air traffic control. And therefore these flights poses a risk to civilian air traffic. The flights are unjustified and they are posing risk on normal air traffic.
Baltic countries have been especially concerned because of their proximity to Russia, and fears of aggression from Moscow will be further raised after Russia's ambassador to Denmark added that the Baltic region is now one of the most unpredictable in the world.
I found this story very interesting. This story is about a U.S. commander who was under arrest and actually demoted. This one says she was arrested for refusing to fire nukes at Russia. This comes out of EUTimes.net. Then we have one over here coming out of the Navy News Service. This says Strategic Communications Wing 1 Commander relieved from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Then we move over here. Out of the Stars and Stripes, Navy Strategic Air Wing Commander fired. So we're going to start with this one. Navy Strategic Air Commander fired by Robert Burns, the Associated Press, published March 17, 2015. Washington. The Navy fired the commander of an organization whose aircraft allowed the President and the Secretary of Defense to directly contact the submarines, bombers, and land-based missiles that compromised the nation's strategic nuclear force. A Navy statement said Captain Heather E. Cole was relieved of her duties as commander of Strategic Communications Wing 1, based at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, for what is called a loss of confidence in her ability to lead. A spokeswoman, Commander Jeannie Grovenveld, said the firing was based on findings of an investigation into her management of the wing. Details were not released. Cole's Air Wing has no role in operating nuclear weapons, but is responsible for the Navy squadrons whose E-6B Mercury aircraft provide communication links between the President and nuclear forces. This one. This is out of the Navy News Service. Strategic Communications Wing 1 Commander relieved. Gives story number. Date 3/17/2015. From Naval Air Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet, Public Affairs. Tinker Base Air Force Base, Oklahoma, Commander Naval Air Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet, relieved the commander of Strategic Communications Wing 1 and Task Force 124 at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, March 17th, due to loss of confidence in commander's ability to lead. CNAP Vice Admiral Mike Shoemaker relieved Captain Heather E. Cole, Commander SCW-1 and TF-124 of her duties. The action resulted from the initial findings of an investigation which determined that Cole had not performed up to the high standards demanded of an officer in command. Cole has been temporarily assigned to the CNAP staff pending the final adjunction of the case. Captain Brian McCormick, the former deputy commander of SCW-1 and TF-124, has been assigned as acting commander of the wing and task force. Now, I'm not going to read all these because I can't fit them all in here. So, here's the big one. This is EU Times. It says something completely different. Top U.S. commander under arrest for refusing to fire nukes at Russia by EU Times. A new report circulating in the Kremlin today, prepared by the Foreign Intelligence Service for the Ministry of Defense, states that President Barack Obama's nuclear war communication commander has been arrested and relieved of her command after failing to transmit launch codes authorizing an atomic weapons first strike attack upon the Federation in coordination with a similar surprise attack planned by the United Kingdom. According to the SVR U.S. Navy Captain Heather E. Cole, photo on the right, was the commander of the U.S. Navy Strategic Communications Wings located at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, whose E-6B Mercury aircraft provided the communication links, allowing President Obama and the U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter to directly contact the submarine bombers and land-based missiles that compromise the United States strategic nuclear force. On Monday, the 16th of March, this report states Captain Cole received from the Pentagon a launch order authorizing a limited nuclear strike against the Federation, but which failed due to critical permissive action link (PAL) failure, thus causing her to abort this planned attack. As PAL is a security device for nuclear weapons whose purpose is to prevent unauthorized arming or detonation of the nuclear weapons, SBR experts in this report explained the critical failure in this instance was an added security measure ordered by the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, prior to his being forced out of office last month over his refusal to have any part of this attack against Russia. This report further explains that Secretary Carter was not aware of Secretary Hagel's PAL security changes, thus allowing Captain Cole to abort this planned nuclear attack. For her failure to communicate the launch authorization to U.S. nuclear forces, this report continues, Captain Cole was arrested on Tuesday, 17th of March, relieved of her command, and then taken by armed guard to U.S. Naval Air Station, Miramar in San Diego, California, where she remains incognito. The SVR, in their report on Captain Cole's refusal to start World War III, further states that her actions mirrors those of the Soviet naval captain Vasil Arkhipov, who during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 also refused to obey orders to launch nuclear weapons against the United States. Upon Captain Cole being arrested, an MOD appendix to this SVR report says President Putin ordered the Federation's strategic nuclear bomber forces to their fail-safe locations in the Arctic, the fastest air route to the U.S. from Russia, an expansion of the Northern Fleet's combat operations into the Norwegian Sea, and continued combat air operations against NATO forces on the northern border. Nukes prepare for a strike. President Putin and the MOD have been made aware of the planned nuclear attack against the Federation weeks ago, thus allowing the Federation to move its own nuclear forces to NATO border. Likewise, and as we have reported on the 15th of March, Obama meets with top Russian spy, warns he can't stop war. Neither President Putin or MOD have any confidence that President Obama is even in control his military forces anymore, thus necessitating the Federation's greatest defensive war moves since World War II. And as we reported on the 17th of March report, Moscow bomb shelters begin to fill as Russia prepares for war. And perhaps most appalling, as President Putin, after greeting over 100,000 cheering citizen supporters in Red Square earlier today, meets with close aide to Chinese President Xi Jinping to update China on the Federation's war preparations. There remains no evidence that the West, particularly the United States, are preparing their own people for the horrific catastrophe soon to come. The fate of Captain Cole, however, is much more known, and it will be exactly like Captain Arkhipav's, a relegation to the dustbin of history as a failed officer at best, or her early suicide death to prevent her from telling what she knows. Okay, this comes out of the EU Times. Moscow bomb shelters begin to fill as Russia prepares for war. The Ministry of Defense, MOD, is reporting today that President Putin has effectively warned both the United States and European Union that British Prime Minister David Cameron must be removed in order to avert the catastrophic consequences of total war. According to this report, President Putin and other top officials were put under the protection of the MOD during the past fortnight after intelligence reports revealed a planned nuclear first strike against the Federation planned by Prime Minister Cameron due to occur this week, and which we had previously reported on in our 14th of March report. Russia warned state of war exists as UK nukes prepare for a strike. If the United States has been complicit in this planned nuclear attack by Prime Minister Cameron against the Federation, this MOD report leaves uncertain based upon information obtained by Federal Security Service Director Alexander Brotovov after his private White House meeting with President Barack Obama a few weeks ago. Also, and as we had reported on March 15th in our report titled Obama Meets with Top Russian Spy, Warns He Can't Stop War, And the MOD again states in their new report today, no one in the Kremlin is even sure if President Obama is in control of his own nation anymore after U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs Victoria Nuland raged last week at Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, claiming that former Vice President Richard Dick Cheney was in charge of the United States now. Even worse, this MOD report continues, regardless of who is in charge of the U.S. right now, a de facto state of war now exists between the Federation of America after the Obama regime's statement yesterday that their sanctions against Russia would basically go on forever, as the Federation will never allow Crimea to retaken by the Nazi-led government of Ukraine. The total war plans ordered by President Putin in response to this extraordinary threat, this report further notes, were made under MOD supervision and consultation over the past fortnight at the highly secretive and mammoth underground Mount Yamamantu complex in the Ural Mountains, and include offensive, defensive, covert, and psychological measures intended to prevent total war. But in failing in that effort, the Federation would then massively respond against the West using all of their capabilities, including nuclear options. Interesting to note, this MOD report is how it details one of the psychological measures used in this total war plan that included this past Sunday's television documentary, wherein President Putin for the first time publicly admitted that he privately threatened the West with nuclear war over the Crimea crisis. Now that's cut off. This MOD report states that this specific psychological measure employed by President Putin in publicly admitting his private threat to use nuclear weapons to protect the Federation was intended to alert the citizens of both the U.S. and EU to grave and horrific dangers they were facing due to the secret war actions of their governments without their knowing. Now I just want to say this in some commentary. That actually did come out. This is when Putin, I don't know if anybody was following my post, but I was up all night covering it. I did put a 5-minute clip of that documentary. Of course, it wasn't in English. They had to translate it, but I did post that for those who remember me posting that. On Monday, upon his return to Moscow, this MOD report continues, President Putin then initiated further actions of the Federation's total war plan, which include 1. The immediate opening of Moscow's 5,000 new bomb shelters President Putin had ordered built in 2010, and which were completed in 2012. The immediate transferring to these bomb shelters all critical equipment and personnel belonging to the Central Clinical Hospital and Polyclinic Office of the President of the Russian Federation. The immediate deployment of strategic nuclear bombers to Crimea. The immediate activation to full combat alert of all airborne forces in the Northwest. The immediate activations of tens of thousands of troops belonging to the Northern Fleet and Western Military District to full combat alert. The immediate activation of Siberian Air Defense Forces. As this nationwide show of force is currently ongoing, this MOD report says Belarus military forces have put their forces on full combat alert too and joined their Russian counterparts in this strategic offensive, as likewise Ukraine has issued plans and aggressive maps showing an attack of Crimea and also Khabun region in southern Russia by Ukrainian army with the support of NATO navies. Even though the Administrator General of the Eurasian Observatory for Democracy and Elections, Alexander Molzov, has stated that nobody in NATO is ready to pay the price of this sort of war with Russia over Crimea. which can involve a nuclear conflict in Third World War. Only Kiev junta, with its team of adventurous far-right and low-level politicians, can dream of this sort of military aggression. MOD experts in this report state that the continued aggressive war actions by the U.S. and EU, combined with the continued demonization of President Putin and Russia's people in the Western press, seems to prove they do indeed want nothing but total war. And with special assistance to the U.S. President Celeste Wallander stating earlier today that President Obama was well aware of President Putin's nuclear war threat, this MOD report chillingly concludes the West has still failed to assure the Federation that Prime Minister Cameron will be removed from office, or even more dangerously, that they will be able to stop this total war at all. EU Times. Prepare for nuclear war, Russia warns citizens as U.S. tanks flood into Europe. There's actually RT footage of this. A new Ministry of Defense MOD report circulating in the Kremlin today states that the Ministry of Civil Defense, Emergencies and Disasters Relief has issued an order for all companies' employers to prepare for nuclear war, while at the same time the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has slammed the U.S. for flooding Europe with tanks and armored vehicles. According to this report, the MCHS issued their order on the 16th of March to companies and employers to immediately provide their workers with radiation suits and gas masks as part of the war orders issued by President Putin, and which we had previously reported on. With these war orders being necessitated after the uncovering of a United Kingdom plot to launch a nuclear first strike against the Federation this week, a situation made even graver after the arrest Tuesday, 17th of March, of U.S. Navy Captain Heather E. Cole for failing to likewise launch American nuclear weapons against Russia on Monday, 16th of March. This report continues. The Kremlin remains alarmed that no one seems to be in charge of the United States anymore. Raising this state of alarm even higher, this report says, was the Federal Security Service Director Alexander Bogdanov has still been unable to contact President Barack Obama, whom he had just met during a private White House visit a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., wherein the American leader stated he may not be able to stop this war. With massive combat operations now existing in all of the Federation's 9 time zones, the MOD further states in this report the General Staff has ordered the immediate deployment to combat status of tens of thousands of more troops, bringing the number to over 80,000 now preparing for war. The MOD further confirms in this report that the Federation's strategic nuclear bombers have been mobilized in Crimea, and that Iskander nuclear missiles are now being deployed in the Kaliningrad region, which borders Poland and Lithuania too. Important to note, the MOD report says are that the Federation's military actions are solely in response to the aggressive war moves of the United States against Russia, which includes tomorrow's start of the U.S. Army's 100-mile armored column journey along the western border, dubbed Dragoon Ride, comprised of American troops from the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and the 12th Combat Aviation Brigade, providing air support. Equally important to note, this report continues, is that the threat against the Federation's northern border with Norway, where thousands of Norwegian troops continue their joint Viking deployment of armored vehicles. Most ominously, however, MOD experts in this report say was President Obama's order this week to immediately deploy to Germany 800 tracked and wheeled vehicles, which when combined with the 220 Abrams main battle tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles the U.S. has sent to Eastern Europe, the 120 Abrams battle tanks and armored vehicles sent to Latvia, and the hundreds of other tanks and armored vehicles stuffed into Norwegian caves for a U.S. main expeditionary brigade. All within the past 8 months, the addition of these estimated 1,400 vehicles of war to Europe by the Americans clearly show the deadly intentions of the West against Russia. And to anyone doubting the intentions of the U.S. in wanting to wage war against Russia, this report grimly reminds everyone, It was just 11 months ago that the Obama regime was trumpeting its removal from Europe of America's last remaining battle tank on the continent. And as we can in part read, as reported by the Stars and Stripes news service on the 9th of April 2014. Amidst the still ongoing crisis in Ukraine, the Obama administration is moving the last U.S. battle tanks from Germany and thus from Europe. At the same time, the Pentagon also is disbanding 2 of the U.S. Army's heavy brigades in Germany. Last year, the 170th Infantry out of Baumholder disbanded, while the 172nd Separate Infantry Brigade at Grafenwohr is in the process of doing the same. John Vandiver reports from Stars and Stripes April 4, 2014, that the U.S. Army's 69-year history of basing main battle tanks on German soil quietly ended last month when 22 Abrams tanks and a main feature of armored combat units throughout the Cold War embarked for the U.S. On March 18th, the remaining tanks were loaded up at the 21st Theater Sustainment Command's railhead and Kaiserslautern, where they then made the journey to the shipping port in Bremerhaven, Germany. There they boarded a ship bound for South Carolina. There is no U.S. tank on German soil. It is a historic moment, said the 21st TSC spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne Morato. As to why and how our world went from last April when no U.S. battle tanks remained in Europe to 11 months later when they continued to flood onto the continent in the hundreds and thousands, and in the face of a massive Russian military response, should be plain to see for anyone caring to. Now all that remains to happen is the planned false flag incident forcing us all into a war very few will ever know the true reasons for, but which the majority of whom, sadly, will also become its casualties.
Over 100 American armoured vehicles have rolled into Latvia as NATO steps up its military activity just 300 kilometres from the Russian border. The move has been described by a senior US military official as a demonstration of the ability to deter the threat from Moscow. The US has also announced it's sending about 3,000 soldiers to Eastern Europe for training exercises. NATO's been frequently conducting military drills in the region for the past year, flexing its military muscles on Russia's doorstep. Now, this is last weekend's show of military hardware in Estonia, with NATO combat vehicles and soldiers taking part. A train loaded with US equipment also arrived in neighbouring Lithuania in January, as US troops stepped up their training there. While here's another train loaded with military cargo from Washington, spotted in Latvia last December. And here's Poland last April, playing host to massive NATO exercises.
Okay, I just want to explain, this is the article that I had at the very beginning of the report. I wanted to save it to the end because now you'll understand exactly why everything's going on right now and why they're trying to cover it up and hide it from us. So I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to show you these maps again. This came out of the Daily Mail on March 24th. 2015. The 12,400-mile superhighway from Britain to America, plans proposed for very ambitious road across Russia. Trans-Eurasian Belt development would span half globe circumference, would link western edge of Russia to the Bering Strait and then Alaska. Joining road networks in Europe and Asia would link the UK to the United States. Russian Academy of Science put forward plan to President Vladimir Putin. Current longest road in the world is the Australian Highway 1 at 9,000 miles. Britain could be linked with America by road as part of an ambitious project to create the world's longest superhighway spanning half the circumference of the globe. Proposals have been put forward to build the mega route stretching about 12,400 miles from the western edge of Russia to the Bering Strait, where the country nudges Alaska. Linking into existing road networks in Europe and Asia, for the first time it would allow travelers a proper highway to drive all the way from the UK to the United States. A Trans-Siberian rail link, as well as oil and gas pipes, would run alongside the highway, and plans have been mooted already for a rail tunnel connecting the far-flung Russian region of Chukotka, where football tycoon Roman Abramovich once served as governor, and Alaska. While roads exist across much of Russia, some are of dismal quality, especially in the east of the country. Among these is the notorious Road of Bones built by Stalin's political prisoners. The new scheme is seen as a very way of turning Russia into a global transportation hub, a bridge between Europe, Asia, and North America, so revitalizing the Russian economy and attracting new tourism. Vladimir Fortov, the head of the Russian Academy of Science, recently put forward the unaccosted plan, dubbed the Trans-Eurasian Belt Development, to President Vladimir Putin. The project is very ambitious and expensive, but it will solve many problems in the development of the vast region, he said, according to the Siberian Times. The current longest continuous road in the world is found in Australia, where Highway 1 runs around the entire country and spans some 9,000 miles. In Russia, the Trans-Siberian Highway network is more than 6,800 miles long, meaning the new road would become the biggest and longest ever built, with additional sections in the west and east. Plans for the Trans-Eurasian Belt development have been presented to President Vladimir Putin, left, by Vladimir Fortov, the head of the Russian Academy of Science, on the right. It is yet uncosted. The notorious Road of Bones, R594, Colonial Highway, named because the skeletons of those who died during the construction were used in its foundations. Plans for the TEPR were unveiled by the head of the Russian Railways, Vladimir Yakunin, who has been hit by Western sanctions over Ukraine, at a meeting of the Russian Academy of Science. Using tunnels or ferries from England, the continent, and Russia to the U.S., a driver could use the highway to travel from Britain to the U.S. for the first time. Its development is viewed as a powerful and versatile corridor that would allow massive investment and the construction of pipelines for oil and gas, the laying of facilities for electricity and water supplies, and the opportunity for new cities to be created. The team behind the project say they estimate it will require trillions of dollars, but insist its economic benefits would far outweigh any cost. What is unclear is how the cash-strapped Russia could afford it. Giving a presentation on the scheme, Yakunin a close friend of Putin, described it as an interstate, inter-civilization project. He also said it would lead to Russia becoming the new world center for the creation and development of high-tech industries because of its central position in the new global transportation network. 5 years ago, Vladimir Putin traveled along some of the existing roads in the Russian Far East as part of a tour to meet voters before the presidential elections. Behind the wheel of the yellow Lada, he drove 2,000 kilometers across Siberia in a stunt intended to boost his ratings as the Russian car industry. But it backfired when he discovered much of the route was in a bad state of repair and his car was photographed on the back of a tow truck. The R504 Coloma Highway, better known as the Road of Bones, after the skeletons of those who died in its construction were used in its foundations. It is the only main road through the remotest parts of the Russian Far East. Connecting Magadan with the town of Nizhny Besika, much of the route is unmaintained and about 200 kilometers is completely abandoned and a challenge even for motorists in 4x4 vehicles. The rail network in Siberia was recently extended with the construction of a new line to a station across the Lena River from Russia's diamond capital, Yakutsk. I can't say some of these words. I apologize. Potentially, this line could be extended further east to Magadan and the northern Pacific. Okay, so now that we've went over this, and you pretty much know what the North American Union is, we went over that through this report. So we're going to go with the maps here. And the one you're looking at right there is going to be the UK to Alaska. Okay. Then you come over here, but you've seen this map already in the report. You're going to have the North American Union, North American Super Corridor. So you're going to have, it's going to run from the UK to Alaska, and then in the United States it's going to run from Mexico to Canada. So basically they're going to do to us what they did to the EU. They're going to combine Mexico with the United States and Canada, which means they will be getting rid of our sovereignty. This is why everywhere we are seeing everyone's rights and laws being violated right now. Now I'm going to move over here to the Chisholm Trail. Right now, the land around this trail is being taken. And the government is telling these people that they're going to take it for a park. For an historical park. Now if you look at this map, okay, this is going to be a 10-lane highway. Alright? It runs the same path as the Chisholm Trail. Okay? The very same. So, and then you have this down here where they're going to be having this Jade Helm 15 drill. They were calling Utah and Texas hostile. That means they're going to be going in and they're going to be around I-35, because I looked at all the places that they're going to, and they're surrounding I-35, they surround Austin, and they surround Dallas. So I just find it strange that they're going to be doing this. I mean, I haven't hardly ever seen even our National Guard really come out of the woodwork and come into the cities and come around to people's towns and stuff like that. And that's our National Guard. But you're going to have special operations. You're going to have Marines. You're going to have Green Berets, Navy SEALs for 8 weeks. Yeah, no. So, I mean, all this stuff has been talked about. I mean, it hasn't been brought up again since, you know, like I said, 5 years ago. They were really talking about it between 2008 and 2010, and then it kind of died down, and now it's coming back up again. And it's just really strange, you know, that I was looking, I saw this map in a video, this North American Union. I mean, it's not like it was the first time I heard it, but I said, man, that sure does look like it takes the same path as the Chisholm Trail. And right now, the government wants to take the the private property of these people that's had it their family since the 1800s. And they're telling these people that they want to put it in a historical park, or it's for like climate reasons or something like that. What do you think it's going to do? What do you think is going to happen to the climate when they go through there and put a 10-lane highway in there? They're lying to these people. And by now you guys should already understand that. I mean, by all the information that has been put forth in this report. There's so much more that we could put in this, but we didn't want to make it too long. So if you want more information, look me up. Jessica Lamb on Facebook. I've got the 3%er flag behind me. We need as many people as we can get to get the truth out about this. We need help. We need more people speaking out. We need more people in front of the camera. Because every day it's getting worse. And the tyranny is running rampant. And I don't care how asleep you are, it's all over the news, it's all over Facebook. You can't run from it. You can't hide from it. This is not something, you know, that you can just say, oh, well, you know, nothing's going to happen. It's already happening. I mean, if you believe you're an American and you no matter what party you're affiliated with or what you believe, if you want to keep the sovereignty of the United States and you want to be free, then you'll speak up. You will research this information. You will start realizing what is going on, and you will start sharing that information and preparing for what's coming.